She's become the face of a revolution, the angel of freedom. 26-year-old Neda Sultan, an innocent bystander who was killed by a sniper's bullet on the streets of Tehran during the recent demonstrations. Through photos and a video clip taken on a cellular phone, the images of Neda's last moments have been transmitted online to millions of people around the world. In past years, even huge protests like those in Iran might have gone unnoticed or just happened under the radar, hidden from the eyes of the world. But now with cell phones and the internet, even one exceptional picture can spark a movement. As the chief photojournalist for the National Geographic magazine stated, the event becomes real when the picture becomes personal. With Neda, the picture became intensely personal for millions of people around the world in a heartbeat. Last week, or the week before, I think I asked you if anyone had an iPod or was familiar with the term. Let me ask you another question today. Has anybody ever heard of Twitter? Twitter is an online social networking site popular amongst 20 and 30-somethings, which transmits pictures and text online. And it's amazing the impact of online social networking. And even though I have resisted technology and resisted computers for a long time, technology really has opened up a whole new world for democratization. And as long as everyone has access and everyone is equal. So Neda's picture, the face of a revolution, transmitted on Twitter and around the world in a heartbeat. But you know, there was another face in another era who became the face of a revolution. And it was in the first century. There was no technology, there were no communication systems, only some old Roman roads. But in a few short years, the movement spread like a wildfire covering the earth. It was Jesus of Nazareth who became the face of this new movement, this new era of love, of justice, of hope, of transformation, and of change. The Word became flesh and lived in our midst. Jesus became the clearest, most decisive snapshot of God's essential character and nature the world had ever seen. And thousands saw in him a new and living way, and they embraced that way. As the journalist said, the event becomes real when the picture becomes personal. Oh, there had been talk for generations about this messianic age, this golden age of peace and prosperity, in which the lion would lay down with the lamb, and the abundance of God's provision would be spread out like a great banquet feast. But this hope was so ephemeral and so elusive. So much religious rhetoric in the face of destitution, of foreign occupation. And then, out of nowhere, this man appeared. This man of God, this Son of God. An itinerant preacher and healer. A rabbi, really. No different than many other rabbis. And yet there was something distinctive about him. As the gospel writers say, he taught as with one who had authority. This was a different teaching. And he was a different kind of man, a different kind of prophet, a different kind of Messiah figure. He always deflected adoration and worship to a higher power. He always said, don't look at me, look at God. He told puzzling stories. He asked troublesome questions. And he challenged people to let loose of their security and their material goods. You see, Jesus was a revolutionary in his own right. His message was subversive. It threatened the status quo. And then that's why the Romans crucified him, or allowed him to be crucified, really. They weren't so concerned about another Messiah figure. They weren't so concerned about a new religion. There were hundreds of messiahs out there trying to start their own religions. They really crucified him not because of theology, but because of sedition. They crucified him not because he said he was God, but because he said he was a king, or it was said of him. And so ironically, when they crucified him, what did they put on the cross in 3 languages? The King of the Jews. Here's your king. Here's your clown. It was an act of sedition that got him crucified. There was something inherently destabilizing about Jesus' message. He questioned the maxims by which people lived. He challenged their allegiances. He failed to get in line when it came to bowing to the emperor. He failed to support the religious hierarchy who were suppressing their own people for their own interest in the name of God. No, Jesus was not apolitical. The church has tried to make Jesus apolitical. He was not apolitical. His teaching had tremendous political implications. It suggested a supplanting of the Roman Empire with a new social order based on love, justice, and radical equality. Above all, Jesus preached an allegiance to a new kingdom, a kingdom in which those at the back of the line would be moved to the front of the line. The weakest and the meekest and the most vulnerable would be served first, and they would be given places of honor at this great banquet feast of God's love. We need to remember all this when we are tempted to privatize the gospel message and say it has no social or political implications. The good news is always personal. It is never private. Now, having said all that, we need to note that Jesus' agenda was not primarily political. He was not a politically partisan person. He didn't belong to a party. He was not a zealot. And within Judaism, there were particular political parties. There were the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes, and then there were the Zealots. The Zealots were the Jews who sought to overthrow the Romans by force. Jesus was not a zealot. He was not a party member. His revolution was first a revolution of love, which involved a personal and spiritual transformation. Jesus knew that in order to break the cycle of oppression and greed and injustice, that the hearts of people had to change. He knew that if it were only a changing of the guard, that the oppressed people would become the oppressors. Because that's the way human nature works. He was very realistic about human nature. And he proposed a radical solution, a transformation so deep and complete, it would be like a death. It would be a spiritual rebirth, a new heart, a new and living way, based on the self-giving love that he himself would model. He would become a snapshot of God's selfless love so that people could see and understand. A picture is worth 1,000 words. When the event becomes real, the event does become real when the picture becomes personal.